I slept with my husband's coworker at the office. He told me to have him and walked out forever. Hi, Redditors. My biggest fear finally came to be all because I was selfish and greedy. I regret everything I did that day. I just really wanted to get Oliver's reaction. I was livid and I wanted him to just behave out of character for me, to show that he loved me. I was just so desperate, and out of my desperation, I pushed him out of my life forever. Oliver and I have been married for 3 years now. We met at a book club, which he frequented because of his love for books. I had been there only because my cousin had offered for me to come with her, so I stopped mopping around the house. I had just gotten out of a relationship then. My ex had broken up with me because he said I was too dependent, only for me to see a picture of him getting married to my so-called friend who was already pregnant with their baby the next week. So I was sad, and my cousin had taken me to the book club meeting so I could perhaps have something to divert my attention. I met Oliver for the first time there, and I instantly liked him. I liked him so much that I started attending all their meetings, even though I wasn't much of a book fan. I wanted to see him, and finally, after 2 weeks of frequenting there, he noticed me and had asked for my number. Eventually, after about a month of speaking, Oliver finally asked me out, and we started dating. I was literally obsessed with Oliver. I even lied about my cousin asking me to leave her house just so he could extend the offer of me living with him. I wanted to be with him at all times. I wanted to talk to him, know who he was talking to, and do everything with him. But I didn't want Oliver to be scared off by my actions, so I managed to pretend like I was comfortable when he had a female client, which was part of his job. Oliver was pretty good at his job, and he was the one who was mostly sent on business deals, and that drove me crazy, especially when the client was female. But I managed to pretend like I wasn't bothered. Even my feelings scared me, so I tried to tone it down. Oliver and I were together for 8 months before we got married. I was over the moon because I thought it would show those girls around him that he was mine and that he chose me. I thought that once we got married, we would start having kids immediately so I could make Oliver stay rooted with me, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I tried so hard to get pregnant, but the one time I did get pregnant, I had a miscarriage, and after that, nothing. I felt really frustrated, and it started to feel like I was the only one who cared. Oliver had told me he wanted us to enjoy our first 2 years together without kids before we started having them, and I had agreed from the start just so Oliver would marry me. But I couldn't wait because I was scared he would leave me. I didn't like that Oliver didn't show concern about it. I started to feel very insecure, and from then on, my insecurities seemed to grow even bigger by the day. I started to feel like Oliver was cheating on me, and I would stalk him during the day. Being a housewife with no other job made it easier to do so. I would fight with him whenever he didn't get home on time and accuse him of having an affair. In my head, I knew that Oliver was faithful to me. He had always been from the start, but knowing that wasn't enough to beat my insecurities, I kept panicking that he would leave me. I checked his phone constantly to see if he had a different woman. I even went as far as following him for his side gigs. Oliver reassured me several times. He left his phone unlocked whenever I was around. He did everything there was to reassure me. But I was so insecure that I just kept pushing him until I eventually pushed him to the wall. Oliver told me once that he wanted me to see a therapist, but I was so angry, and I fought with him that day, thinking he thought of me as insane. I became so paranoid that I chased away most of my friends except the married ones, because I was scared they would take Oliver from me. But then even the married ones stayed away from me because, according to them, they couldn't stand me anymore. It went on like these for all the years we were married, and Oliver never walked away or left. In my head, he was the toxic one while I was the victim. I didn't know that it was the other way round. I didn't think that I was the one ruining our marriage with my awful behavior. I just kept convincing myself that Oliver was the one at fault for making me think the way I was. But I think I knew, even back then, deep in my mind, I knew I was the toxic one in our marriage. I knew that what I was doing was pushing him away. I just managed to somehow convince myself that I was doing the complete opposite. I wish I knew the end result back then. Then perhaps I wouldn't have made the mistakes that I did. Soon Oliver started to avoid me. Well, not on purpose, but I didn't think so at the time. He mostly had to work outside of town, and it led to lots of arguments between us. I thought it was only because he wanted to spend more time with his lover, and that he used work as an excuse. Oliver, who was always tired of the arguments we were always having, would leave the house to avoid it, or sometimes travel earlier than he should just so we could stop fighting. And I, whenever he left, would go over to Steve's apartment to complain and to find comfort in his hands. The comfort that came from skin-to-skin contact. Yes, I was cheating on Oliver with Steve, who worked with Oliver. I've always known Steve. I didn't just suddenly decide at that party to sleep with Steve just to make Oliver jealous. I had been sleeping with Steve for a year before Oliver found out about us. I knew Steve thought Oliver had brought him home a couple of times for dinner and even sometimes invited him over to watch football matches together. Sometimes we even had dinner or lunch with him and his wife. He was practically family, and I considered him that until that evening. Although Oliver and Steve worked together, Oliver was literally his boss. He worked directly under Oliver, even though Oliver was employed 3 years after he had been there, and then promoted 4 months after he started. Steve had only been promoted once, unlike Oliver, who had gotten 3 promotions on getting there. I should have known that everything that Steve did was out of contempt for Oliver. He was jealous of Oliver's successes and wanted what he had, which was why when he saw the crack in our marriage, he slipped right through. And sadly, that crack had been all because of me. At that time, I just thought Steve cared about me. At least that was what he told me. He told me everything, all lies, I know that now, that Oliver was doing, how he easily flirted around and how he wasn't good for me. Steve manipulated me into bed with him using my feelings. I remember how it had all started with Steve. Oliver and I had had another argument, and he had left the house angrily. I was accusing him again of enjoying female company way too much for comfort. It was because we stepped out together to go shopping, and Oliver had met a lady whom they had apparently gone to high school together. I was angry when they kept laughing and talking and eventually exchanged contacts, and I decided to tell Oliver how I felt about what they did in not-so-gentle ways. Oliver left the house and told him he was sleeping at the office because he wanted to give me space to think about my actions, and he would only come home when I was ready to hear him out. I was very upset, and then Steve had come over that evening. Oliver had been so upset about the accusations he had forgotten that he invited Steve over to watch football with him. Steve met me crying my eyes out and tried to comfort me. He, of course, knew that Oliver and I had lots of arguments. He witnessed some of them mostly because of me. Oliver never really told him anything about our fights. But that evening, when he was there holding me and tapping my back softly, I don't know what just came over me. I had always excused that action of mine as basic needs instead of being selfish. I wanted comfort, and him tapping my back and whispering rubbish into my ears suddenly wasn't enough. So I pushed myself into his laps and kissed him. Steve said nothing. He didn't even push me away, asked me what I was doing, and reminded me who it was that I was to him, and then walked away. He had rather adjusted me in his laps so that he could have proper access to my body. There were no words said between us that night. I wasn't even thinking of the so-called reason I was doing it for. I just wanted comfort, and Steve was providing that. It was all that mattered to me at that point. It was only hours later, while both of us were naked and on my matrimonial bed, did everything I did come back to me. Steve left that night but said nothing to me or about what we had done weeks after that. I was so scared that Oliver was going to find out. I even washed the sheets as if it would get rid of our sin. Oliver came home the evening of the next day, and I had been the first to apologize. I even promised never to accuse him wrongly again. Oliver didn't believe me, of course. It wasn't the first time I was promising something like that, and I did break the promise a few days after making it. We were really okay for a few days after I made the promise. I really wanted to be a better wife, not because I was less insecure, but because I wanted to reduce my guilt. But soon enough, I found something to accuse Oliver of, and we fought again, and he left the house, which had become a force of habit, to avoid exchanging words with me. I was disheartened again, and I found myself dialing Steve's number to tell him what had happened. When Steve came over to check on me, we ended up sleeping together again, only this time not on the bed because I didn't have the strength to wash them. From that day on, any time that I found something to be upset about, Steve was the next person I called to comfort me. I became so addicted to sleeping with him so much that sometimes Oliver and I wouldn't have any arguments. I would just make something up, just so we could have sex. It didn't help matters that he was better in bed than Oliver. Oliver had always been someone who didn't believe in role play and all of the other naughty stuff. He was a romantic lover truly, and made it enjoyable, but it was an entirely different ballgame with Steve. Steve was selfish in bed, and mostly only ever worked towards his own satisfaction and not mine. He was also naughty, and we did all sorts of things that I had never done in my life. But crazily, I liked it. I liked how I got to enjoy both sides with both of them. A romantic lover and a sinful, naughty one, and I thought it was amazing. I managed to convince myself that it was all Oliver's fault. He was the one who made me crave another man's touch. He was the one who drove me into seeking comfort in another man's arms. I blamed him for everything in my head, and that somehow managed to make the whole guilt thing ease. Steve and I stopped having sex at the house when we almost got caught by Oliver's sister, who had dropped in unannounced at the house. Oliver, being a free-spirited person, had given his sister an extra key to the house, even though that had been before we ever met. He never thought to collect it back because she never really showed up unannounced, but that day, unluckily, she decided to. I was with Steve at that moment, and it was when she got closer to the room that I heard her calling for me. I quickly hid Steve, and in my haste, I wore Steve's shirt instead of my top, and then I pretended to have just woken up to the sound of her voice. She stayed for 3 hours before she left. She had noticed the shirt and asked, and I lied that it belonged to Oliver, and she frowned but said nothing. It was only after she left that I remembered that Oliver owned no shirt. He never liked looking corporate, and his job luckily allowed him to dress however he liked. She must have known that, but I couldn't correct it anymore. I panicked, and for weeks I expected Oliver to ask me about it because I knew how close they were and how often they spoke. But when Oliver said nothing about it, I relaxed, thinking she might have thought nothing of it. Although she didn't mention anything to Oliver, I told Steve that we had to get another place to meet up because I didn't want to get caught. I was scared that the next person to walk into the house would be Oliver, and I couldn't risk it. So we chose a hotel that was plain out of sight because we couldn't do our business at his house either because of his wife. The hotel was almost at the outskirts of town, and I knew that Oliver would have nothing to do there. So we continued seeing each other, thinking that we couldn't ever get caught. I mean, there was nothing to suspect that we were together. Steve even stopped coming to the house, totally making one excuse or the other whenever Oliver invited him because he didn't want us to behave awkwardly around Oliver and make him suspect us. I didn't think that it was Steve's little way of taking out his anger on Oliver, by sleeping with his wife even though Oliver didn't know that at the time. I just thought I was the only one benefiting from our little arrangement. And when Oliver had to spend most of his time out of town for work, we would stay days at the hotel just laying around doing nothing but sleeping, eating, and having sex. But soon everything ended up in my face. I got nothing but shame and regrets at the end. I cannot forget the look on Oliver's face when he walked in on us that day at the office. It was a small party organized by their company to celebrate the successful end of the project that Oliver had to travel out of town for. It was only for the staff, and they were allowed to bring a +1. Oliver had brought me, of course, and Steve came alone. When Oliver asked him why he didn't bring his wife, he told him that she was sick, but it was a lie, and we both knew it. He had told me a week before that day that he couldn't stand seeing me with Oliver, and he would have to watch that all evening, and he was sure he wouldn't be able to contain his anger, and wouldn't want his wife to suspect him. I didn't, and still do not know what he had told his wife to make her stay back, because the last time I saw her at the mall was 3 days ago. She had been shopping for a dress to wear for the party. I said nothing and stayed close to Oliver halfway through the party. It was so boring to me because all they discussed was work. The crazy thing, even the +1 that the other workers brought seemed to know things about the business and were adding their own bits. I knew nothing because, to be honest, I had never been really interested in Oliver's work or how he did it. The only bit I had always been interested in was finding out who he was working with at that moment. But sitting there clearly clueless made me upset. And I told Oliver that I wanted to leave, and Oliver told me to get a cab since I had a drink, and he couldn't exactly drive me home either, since he too had been drinking. He wasn't ready to leave yet because he apparently had someone he had to speak to concerning some job. I became upset again. My insecurities were taking over. I wanted to know if the person he was willing to leave his wife for was a female client, so I stayed behind, and eventually Oliver had stood up and gone to meet her. A lady who was dressed so classy and felt like she belonged there far more than I did. I felt small when I looked at her with her glossy lips and perfect shape compared to mine with my rounded stomach, even without a child in it. I felt very jealous, and I forgot where I was, and I just walked over to Oliver and started to stake my claim. Oliver was really upset, and he ordered me to go home, especially after I stylishly called the woman a gold digger. I was so upset that Oliver was standing up for her, but instead of going home as Oliver had ordered me to do, I went into one of the offices and I called Steve to come to me. I didn't really think of my actions. I was just so blinded by anger and wasn't thinking straight. In my head, all I was doing was comforting myself while making Oliver jealous. I didn't know that as soon as I walked out, Oliver had tried to apologize to the woman and soon ran after me to check on me. And there he found me almost naked in the arms of another man on an office desk, which coincidentally turned out to be his. I was so shocked when Oliver opened the door even after I thought Steve had locked it. He opened it and found me having sex with Steve. I was so shocked and didn't know what to say. Steve, on the other hand, quickly pulled away and was adjusting his trousers while blaming everything on me. I didn't even see Oliver move until I saw Steve on the floor cradling his nose that was bloody. It was only when I saw people gathering at the door out of the blue that I realized that I had screamed loud enough to attract people into the room. It didn't take long to work out what was happening, of course, because I saw people giving me dirty looks on the desk, where I sat still with my dress up. I just couldn't move, and sat there frozen with my hand on my mouth, and it was only when Oliver tried to leave that I ran after him, while pulling my dress, and I was trying to get him to listen to me. I wanted to tell him that I loved him and not Steve, and that what was happening was because I thought he was cheating on me. But Oliver just turned and looked at me in disgust and said, "Have him." And then he left me right there. He didn't even spare me another glance, and he just left me with everybody else who kept whispering and calling me names. I did what I thought was best at the moment. I ran. I ran away from that place, and I didn't even care about Steve, who had been bleeding from his nose at the time I left. All I cared about was Oliver. I didn't want to lose him, and getting to him was my top priority. But by the time I got a cab and got home, Oliver's car was already parked there and the door was locked. I had unfortunately forgotten my bag at the party, and my key was in it. I banged the door for over an hour, begging Oliver to let me in and allow me explain, but I got no response. I couldn't go back to the company again, not only because it was late, but because of my shame. Everyone there had witnessed my husband catching me with my lover, and I was sure none of them would like me there again after I ruined their night with my illicit affair. I stayed in the garage all night in the cold because Oliver wouldn't open up the door, and the next morning when Oliver stepped out, he didn't even pay any attention to me and just drove out, leaving me out there again. It was shocking to me how totally someone who loved you wholeheartedly could change overnight. My betrayal made Oliver hate me so much that when I left to find some place to stay and wait until evening for him to get back, he had come back home and taken out my luggages. And on my bags was a letter. Divorce papers. I didn't even know one could get divorce papers that fast, but I guess with a lawyer, as one of your many acquaintances because of your line of work, you could. The calls, the texts, the pleading. Nothing worked. Oliver was determined to do away with me, and it hurt so badly. My parents, after finding out about my sin, threw me out of their house, told me to find someplace else to hide my disgraceful self. None of my friends wanted anything to do with me, especially after the way I had treated them in the past because of my insecurities. No one could believe that I was that stupid enough to let my insecurities lead me as far as sleeping with another man in the name of comfort. Now, nothing makes any sense. Everything that I once thought was right. My behavior, the fights I had with Oliver thinking I was the right one, the silly arguments that shouldn't even have happened, the lack of focus on the most important person, which is Oliver. Everything that I once thought was good and right are all totally and absolutely wrong. I regret everything that I have done because now I have no one. No one at all on my side. Everybody hates me, especially Oliver, who probably thinks of me as shit at the moment, and it hurts so much. The memories refuse to leave. I kept hurting all over and over again, and the result of my actions is like a bottomless pit of hell with no escape route. None at all. I wish I could go back in time and change everything, but even I know that wishing will never take away the things I've done. I will always be stuck in this time loop, replaying every single moment that I know I could have done better,